This is MichMash, a weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under the radar statewide story that affects you. I'm Cheyna Roth.
And I'm Alethia Kasben. Cheyna, we have a budget.
That we do. And since this is a big deal, we're putting together this bonus episode for it after all. We've brought on a heavy hitter to help us break it all down. Dave Eggert, senior reporter from Crain's Detroit. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Before we get into the really nitty gritty of all this, I have to ask, how late were you two up last night? How long did all of this madness take?
Do you want to go first, Dave?
Sure. I think I maybe got to bed around 5 a.m. I think the legislature was in session after 4 a.m.
Oh my God.
It was rough. I wasn't on the floor. I was at home watching and working with our great reporters who were on the floor. And just to sort of say this out into the ether, I went to go to bed at 4:50 a.m. and my 11-month-old baby woke up in her crib and said, actually, you're going to feed me and play with me and not go to sleep yet. So, and then I had to sleep in my other daughter's bed because the big kid was in my bed. So it was all around a great time.
Oh no.
Good start to the weekend. Huh?
Good start. So the budget itself is almost $81 billion, kind of. So I know that we're tired, but I want to try to break down, should we call this a $75 billion budget or an $81 billion budget?
That's a really good question. There's even other numbers floating out there, like $83 billion budget. But essentially what happened, there's a lot of changes under the big, beautiful bill signed by President Donald Trump. And one was affected how Medicaid's funded with provider taxes. So my understanding, there's something like maybe $9 billion that's just sort of off to the side, staying as contingency right now in the budget, depending on how things get worked out, particularly with a provider tax on insurers.
So the state could end up spending that money, but maybe not if the taxes are allowed in a different form. So that could mean, the budget, essentially what it's spending right now is $75 billion, which I just point out because, Republicans did get their budget, that's lower than what we're spending in current year, which is about $83 billion.
Yes,
Okay.
no, and that did seem to be an emphasis from particularly Speaker Matt Hall, although I would caution some of these top line numbers are sometimes hard to compare given, Medicaid caseloads changes throughout the fiscal year. They did a supplemental spending last night, I think of $2.5 to $3 billion.
Yeah.
So that gets factored in. So it'll probably take a little time for it all to shake out.
Well, moving to roads, the governor really wanted fixing the darn roads to be part of the final budget. Dave, is she going to be happy with what lands on her desk?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's not what was initially sought, which was $3 billion, but this has been a decades-long fight in Lansing, and which has always struggled to figure out how to pay for roads. It does seem like historically when governors and lawmakers go for a figure, $3 billion, they often don't get to that, right? There's compromise. The number starts coming down. But no, this is a dedicated source of revenue, particularly through the new cannabis tax is one. There's some things in there that maybe over time future legislators could change, distribution of corporate income tax revenues and things like that. But no, I think given we're in divided government, she historically has struggled to get any kind of traction with a long-term road funding plan. I think she'll see this as a big win.
So speaking, of the cannabis tax, the legislature, did final passage of a 24% wholesale tax on cannabis last night. I think your colleague Dustin has done some really great reporting in this space. So I want to talk a little bit about first, was this a hard sell for the legislature? And then also, how are cannabis businesses feeling about this?
It definitely seemed like it was a hard sell in the Democratic-led Senate last night. I mean, there was clearly some arm twisting going on, some negotiations, some talks with the governor, talks with the leaders. Senate Majority Leader Winnie Brinks did deliver the votes in the end, but it did seem like in the Senate, particularly, it was a lot harder lift than in the House. Part of that I think was just this had been on the radar earlier in the year, but it did, I think, kind of come out of nowhere last week from the House. And then the industry, the workers, the businesses, started mobilizing and showing up at the Capitol and, know that they're furious about the tax. Michigan has one of the biggest weed markets in the country, and they would argue that's because of the structure that Michigan has, a lower tax rate. They're warning that that Michigan's going to become like California, which kind of had to reverse course and change some of its taxes to because of concerns that a lot of the market was going underground. So no, it was a sizable lift.
So free school meals are back, which was a priority for Whitmer and Senate Democrats. But Dave, what are some other big points in the education portion of the budget?
The per pupil funding is up to $10,050. That's like I think a 4.6% increase. That's a big priority often for both parties. That was big. There's a 25% increase in funding for at-risk students. I think that would be seen as another big step forward. There's some new funding in there. It's kind of been below the radar for career and technical education funding. The governor had proposed at the time, I think probably what was billed as the largest increase ever for career and technical education. This was short of that, but I still think is seen as a significant step. What else am I forgetting here?
I don't know. It's just a $24 billion budget. The other thing I thought was interesting in the education budget is the funding for small classroom sizes. I think it was $65 million, right? That's been the Detroit News has done some good reporting on that about, large class sizes in usually poorer districts and how that helps outcomes. The outgoing superintendent has called for lower class sizes, so the legislature did put some funding in there, which they have, I think, previously done before to try to incentivize smaller class sizes. So that was another interesting nugget. I think for K-12.
Yeah, and another one that had not been on my radar much, but was in there as part of a supplemental is, I think it's like $200 million to increase teacher pay. It's I guess, going to be built into the per pupil grant. And it's still shaking out as to like how that would actually work, but that could be whether it's bonuses for all teachers around the state or some kind of like actual salary increase permanently.
Well, we are going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, more budget talk. Was there anything in the budget that either of you found especially surprising or like, whoa, this is a big deal?
So I think since we just talked about education, obviously we're still looking through this very large budget. So I'm sure there'll be other surprises, but I thought it was interesting and I still don't fully understand, what they're doing. But the change in teacher retirement, they made these increases like you just talked about to at-risk, to the per pupil funding, but then they're also, I think, going to try to have schools pay more toward retirement, and they just reduced that as part of the budget last year, and it was a huge fight. And there might be like another fight on their hands. They already made the school group so mad with the process, which is also something else that surprised me. They announced more than a week ago they had a deal, and the fact that it took until after midnight a week later, I'm still pretty surprised by. I know they said it was drafting, but I've seen them draft a budget in 15 hours and vote on it a day they announced the deal.
Yeah, I think it's been very confusing as to how much of the framework was an actual deal versus we actually have things to iron out here, including up until the middle of this week. And I think particularly on some of the things that were done with legislative earmarks, it definitely seemed like some of that was very last minute. I know they've tried to get away from that. There's been some transparency changes, but yesterday the Senate had a hearing to just announce a list of projects. I haven't even had a chance to go look to see how many of those actually got into the budget. So there's still a lot of things happening last minute.
I did actually just look, so I know these numbers off the top of my head. So legislative earmarks, the House Republicans said we want to make sure that there is a name attached to all of these earmarks and they're at least put out in public. So the Senate, like you said, they only did this yesterday. So you can call it is more transparent than it was. But, it was hours before the budget passed. They ended up on $120 million in legislative earmarks for a supplemental budget. So those can take effect from last year's budget, and then I think about 28 million in the Leo budget for current year, which I guess is all current year because we're in the next fiscal.
One thing that I don't know if I'd call it surprising, but that was new to this process as the Republicans were looking for cuts is this whole phenomenon that they refer to as phantom state employees, these unfilled FTE positions. And I'll be honest, it's something that's going to take more reporting to kind of figure out the impact to the state workforce. But anytime in any, for any employer, when positions are defunded or eliminated, there can be an impact. I think it's been kind of unclear how significant that is. I think Speaker Hall said it was around 2,000 FTEs that are being eliminated in the budget. And that, that's a big change. I think typically it seems like state government has been adding FTEs most years.
Yeah, it's kind of rare to see those go down. Dave, do you think there's anything missing from the budget, something that you expected or, something that lawmakers were pushing for that didn't make it?
I would say just for a little context, the governor has long wanted to replace or tweak Michigan's economic development approach. And the big thing in the last few years has been this strategic outreach and attraction reserve. I don't know if I said that right.
I think that's right.
And it just seems like, if anything, they put even more cuts into the MEDC in this budget. I had thought there had been kind of rumblings, maybe there'd be some global deal where they address the economic development incentives, particularly when they were trying to land this huge project over in the Flint area, a semiconductor plant. Once that fell through, my guess is they just kind of lost momentum to try to get it. But that's a very tricky issue. But I was a little surprised, I guess.
So one last thing, although the budget has passed, are there any irreversible damages because it took this long, or does passing the budget just sort of okay, we're good, and just fix everything, you guys?
I mean, I would hope that this whole process adds to the concern about the budget process overall. There were already concerns about how the budget has been playing out in recent years. It is often late at night. In this case, they ended up having to do a continuation budget. So in terms of there being any damages, I don't think there really are because there wasn't really any impact. They had a continuation budget. We didn't pass a payday for state employees. We didn't pass a day where schools were owed payment. That's when there would have been actual issues in terms of the state making out payments. But I would hope that maybe people take the July 1st statutory deadline a little bit more seriously. But I guess we'll see. That might be hoping for too much.
Yeah, no, I think when you get into situations like this, it just causes a lot of stress and angst. And if you're a school district and your fiscal year starts July 1st, it's been 3 months since then. And I do think there were a lot of people around the state, particularly with free meals at schools. You were starting to see notifications from school districts. My own children's school district in the Lansing area had stopped that program at the start of the school year. I think it was one of the, if not maybe the only among a few in the state that had done that. But there are, ramifications that do occur when they don't, if not pass a budget, signal what may be in the budget, particularly for K-12. And I get there were different circumstances this year. So much of the road funding plan kind of had a school aid component with the way they were shifting taxes around. But I think it's no one. I don't think any lawmaker was like really happy last night that this had dragged on so long, but they did get it done.
That's going to do it for us this week. Finally, Dave, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks.